Hello, my name is Joe Wasserman. Welcome to another edition of Peace is Possible, where we explore peace issues being ignored by the mainstream or corporate media. Peace is possible if we all stand up and demand it. Tonight, we will play a DVD interview with David Swanson, Executive Director of an organization called World Beyond War. A number of issues are covered in this interview relating to the size of our military budget and the lack of any real logic behind our cycle of endless wars. As I speak, a confrontation is developing between the U.S. and Iran. We need to be very critical of the version of events as explained by the Trump administration. The American people have been lied to about the so-called weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the events surrounding the Gulf of Tonkin, and the Vietnam War. And we have been given a very distorted picture of the view of the situation in Venezuela. Please call our senatorial and congressional offices and ask them for a peaceful solution with the situation with Iran. We also need to demand that this overbloated military budget be cut and we invest in things like green infrastructure and schools instead of figuring out how to blow up the world 100 times. The Congressional Switchboard, you could call again, as I mentioned in previous presentations, is 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. That's the Congressional Switchboard, and they will connect you to our Congressperson, John Larson, and our two senators, Dick Blumenthal and Chris Murphy. Leave messages with the aides and say we want to push for a peaceful solution. Congress should push for a peaceful solution to the situation with Iran, and we need to cut this overbloated military budget. Thank you.
Welcome to Redacted Tonight VIP. I'm Lee Camp. Today I talk with author, activist, radio show host, Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and director of World Beyond War, David Swanson. We get into NATO, Trump, Russia, Venezuela, the war machine, the unaccounted for $21 trillion of adjustments at the Pentagon, and so much more. In the second half, I'll tell you how we can know for sure that the U.S. does not want to help the people of Venezuela, nor the people of Colombia, for that matter. But first, here's my interview with David Swanson. David, great to talk to you again.
Hi, Lee. Great to be here.
So let's start with NATO. You're an organizer and a presenter at the No to NATO, Yes to Peace Festival here in Washington, D.C., April 3rd and 4th. It's going to be big, it's going to be important, but let me ask you, why do such a thing? I've been told by very, very smart people that NATO is about peace, and it shows how our countries can cooperate rather than be at each other's throats, right?
Well, wrong. As you and I have discussed, it is possible to imagine some other ways to cooperate other than teaming up on bombing Yugoslavia or Libya or Afghanistan or anywhere else. It's possible to cooperate by joining treaties, including disarmament treaties, by supporting international law, the International Criminal Court, by actually providing humanitarian aid rather than so-called military aid. I mean, there are ways to not be an isolationist other than mass killing, other than supporting the biggest military alliance on the planet. 3/4 of the world's militarism in this little group called NATO that we're supposed to think of as somehow, legal and legitimizing for crimes.
Yeah, they put that NATO banner on it, and those are supposed to be the good kind of wars, right? But you're saying there could be peace without bombing, huh?
Well, we haven't found that bombing got us to peace in 100 years or more of trying since the war that was going to end all wars. The notion that peace might get us to peace hasn't been given a real fair shot yet, but it seems very, very promising in those corners of the world where it's been tried. So, this notion that Trump is somehow anti-NATO and therefore NATO is good.
I want to ask you about that because Trump has criticized NATO on multiple occasions. He's even threatened to pull out of it. Does that mean Trump is a peacenik and he's creating a more peaceful world, or he's trying, and anyone who considers themselves left-wing should support Trump, right?
Well, whenever Trump makes any sort of hint halfway in the direction of peace in Syria or Afghanistan or Korea, everyone goes berserk and is suddenly on the side of war. But when Congress makes a gesture in the direction of peace on Yemen, Trump is adamantly opposed, and he has escalated every single war that he inherited. He's enlarged the military. He's enlarged the drone murders. He's not a man of peace, and he's not actually taken any steps against NATO. I mean, Trump is like the Bible. You can find everything and its opposite in him and decide which one you want to cite as your authority. But when it comes to actions, what actions has he taken to limit or reduce NATO? NATO's adding Macedonia. They're talking seriously now about adding Ukraine, which, Russia is going to be more upset about than anywhere else. NATO is expanding to Russia's borders with troops, with missiles, weapons into Ukraine. The idea that Trump is somehow restraining NATO because he favors peace, I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and I want to ask you more about the media angle of that, the Congress's view on that, because every time, Trump says he's pulling troops out of somewhere, such as Syria or Afghanistan, or that he's working to create peace with North Korea, and like you say, he, says both sides of things, so what he says doesn't really matter, but every time he does state that he's doing one of those things, every member of Congress, every mainstream media outlet, from NPR to Fox News to CNN, they all go, no, don't do that! It's suicide! What do you make of that?
It's largely partisanship, partisanship restrained by militarism, right? Because when he says we must overthrow the government of Venezuela before secret cells of Hezbollah restrict your freedoms in the United States, or in order to give humanitarian aid to people we're starving to death, everybody's on board. I mean, there's this big a taboo against opposing U.S. militarism or even U.S. military spending, as there is, for bad-mouthing AIPAC or for, backing a basic income guarantee, as the Green New Deal accidentally did, a Green New Deal which, by the way, is not opposed to attacking Venezuela in order to steal and burn its oil, or opposed to military spending in any way. So when it's reversed, when there's some indication of peace from the White House, then the Democrats, by and large, are gung-ho for war. But when it's an idea for a new exciting war from the White House, suddenly their partisanship seems to fade away, and even their Russophobia and Russiagate seem to evaporate, because it's not as if Russia is on the side of overthrowing the Venezuelan government.
Yeah, they tie themselves in the media ties themselves in a pretzel, trying to say, oh, well, on one hand, Russia is the puppet of Putin, but on the other hand, Trump wants to Trump is the puppet of Putin, but on the other hand, Trump wants to overthrow Maduro, and Russia does not, and that somehow still proves he's the puppet of Putin. It doesn't really connect, but they say it anyway,
Things don't have to make sense. It's become a general rule that U.S. wars are fought both to benefit the people who are being bombed out of a spirit of brotherhood and philanthropy, and in order to murder all of those evil, people of whatever description, dark skin, wrong language, wrong religion, evil dictator, etc., simultaneously. And sections of the U.S. public that support the more enlightened reason reason to bomb people's houses, and the other section of the U.S. public that's more supportive of the racists, sadistic, genocidal reason to bomb people's houses, simultaneously will support the same action and avoid noticing, for the most part, the other motivation of their, brothers in arms. So logic is not required when you're dealing with war.
As long as we're on the topic of Venezuela, as we've said, this U.S.-backed coup is being pushed by Congress, by the Trump administration, by every mainstream media. It's all being forced down our throat. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan people did elect Maduro. They did not elect Juan Guaido. We just named him the president of Venezuela. Like, what do you make of this, and what do you think it'll take to get the American people to care or to understand that maybe we shouldn't be involved in other countries?
And this is, again, the very same people who are claiming that Vladimir Putin installed the current U.S. president and who are not asking any foreign nations to invade and overthrow the U.S. government, are not picking some GW graduate to announce that he's now the president of the United States. The U.S. election doesn't measure up to the Venezuelan election standards, which are, admittedly low. But regardless, nothing, no poor election, no poor governance, nothing justifies in going in and overthrowing a government or threatening violence against a nation. The largest crime cannot be justified by some lesser crime. There's no way to get to that point. I think Denmark is, far more socialist than Venezuela, but there isn't some level of socialism that allows you to go in and overthrow a government and install a preferable, more right-wing regime. It's not legal, it's not moral, it's not practical, and most of the world doesn't buy the lies that the U.S. public often does.
Yeah, I love that. You'll see the mainstream media running around saying that all the other nations have now declared Juan Guaido the leader of Venezuela, but it's really 30 nations out of roughly 200 nations that have declared him the head of Venezuela, and they're kind of just caving to what the United States wants. And on top of, obviously the socialist reason that, the Venezuela threw off its capitalist yoke is very upsetting to us, but on top of that, largest oil reserves in the world, and John Bolton, the national security advisor and resident maniac, said on Fox News that we want to get Venezuela's oil. We want American corporations in there to get it. And he just outwardly said that's our reason for backing this coup. So my question is, how much stake do you put in electoral politics? John Bolton is not an elected official. Elliott Abrams is not an elected official. Congress doesn't even seem to half know what's going on in Venezuela. I mean, when people stick a mic in their face and ask them, they don't seem to have many details as to what's going on there. These decisions, a lot of our decisions about war and about U.S.-backed coups are not being made by elected officials. So how much do our votes matter in the topic of war?
I think you showed some of those clips of Max Blumenthal questioning Congress members about Venezuela. What struck me was, those people on the streets of L.A. that the Tonight Show asks, can you name a country, any country? And they can't do they actually look relatively intelligent now in comparison with elected members of the United States Congress. Just absolutely brainless, ill-informed, and openly asserting that they won't bother with foreign policy because they prefer some other topic. Just disgraceful. I mean, this is not a question of incidents or anecdotes. I mean, scholars have studied where rich, powerful nations invade other nations. And it does not correlate with terrorist threats, although it does produce them. It does not correlate with human rights abuses. It correlates very, very strongly with the presence of oil or gas. And then you have, Bolton, who, by the way, is telling, very openly the same blatant lies about Iran in hopes of getting another war going there. You have him openly, shamelessly saying this is all about the oil. And so it comes down to just avoiding paying any attention to that. And I know Abrams is scheduled to testify, but for the most part, Congress isn't having some grand debate about this, and the U.S. media isn't. They're just avoiding it. The Washington Post Post this morning had, asserted numerous times that Guaido, until recently, was unknown abroad, without ever mentioning the seemingly more relevant point that he was unknown in Venezuela. I mean, there's just, the facts are just avoided for the most part.
Yeah, over 80% of Venezuelans did not know who he was until we declared him the president of Venezuela. We have the largest military in the world, and the Trump administration has, really just spent more money on it, which Congress is happy to give them. The stated budget is the same as the next 7 or 8 countries combined, but we're learning that the stated budget is not where it ends. There are $21 trillion of unaccounted for adjustments over the past 20 years, and even if you assume some of those adjustments go both ways, it's still trillions of dollars spent with no say from the American people. Is there any accountability, any transparency for where all this war money's going?
Very little. It is unaudited. It is the only agency that's never been audited. It's been compelled by law to be audited and has failed and refused. It is, when you add in not just the Department of so-called Defense, but the Department of so-called Homeland Security and militarism in the State Department and the nukes in the Energy Department and on and on and on, it's over $1 trillion a year from this one country, which is roughly equivalent to the rest of the countries of the world put together, many of which are in that little organization called NATO, meaning that about 3/4 of the world's military spending and weapons dealing abroad, in which the United States is also the leader, supplying weapons to dictatorships across the globe, it is from the U.S. and its close allies. So the U.S. public would get rid of this military spending step by step if empowered democratically. I mean, year after year after year, polls show that the U.S. public wants to reduce military spending, and Congress does not and won't do it. I mean, just like here in the state of Virginia, where we would be far better off governed by popular referendum. No public referendum has ever dressed up in blackface, has ever been accused of sexual assault. We could do far better if we just had democracy rather than bombing people in its name. And we would kickstart a reverse arms race. You would see not just Russia reduce its military spending every year, which is already happening, but China reduce its military spending every year, if only the United States would do it. But who does that, enrich? Just the rest of us, not the weapons dealers.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned on a recent radio show you were on, the amount of money to end world hunger for the year, the UN estimates is about $30 billion. So we could end world hunger many times over. And my argument is that would make us more secure than anything else as a country. That would give us security because no one wants to attack the country that ends world hunger. We'd be the good guys for once. I want to move on to I don't even know why we're talking about presidential candidates already, but you know how it goes. Only one of the likely presidential candidates so far has been clearly and outwardly going after the war machine, calling out all the U.S.-backed coups, saying we need to get out of all these other countries. And that candidate is Tulsi Gabbard, a veteran, and yet she has been mercilessly attacked since the moment she started running, both by the right, of course, but really by the so-called liberals. Why are they so scared of her?
Well, I think you answer your own question. I mean, I would include Marianne Williamson in that list of peace candidates, and probably some others I've never heard of. I keep stumbling on more people who are running for president. You almost have to ask everybody you meet now, are you running for president? Because they just are piling up. But yeah, Tulsi Gabbard is the one who's in Congress, who's running for president, who's talking about peace in a serious way and putting out good things on her website and on the talk shows. And she's not nearly as for peace as I am, but relative to your average House member or senator, she's radically in favor of peace, and that's absolutely unacceptable. And she's done a pretty good job on the talk shows of pushing back against the predictable, accusations of being an Assad lover and so forth. I think, that's all to be very much encouraged. And I know a lot of people who are very enthusiastic about her, particularly veterans for peace, because she's something of a veteran for peace herself. It certainly improves the debate to have her in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And simply just to have those questions on the topic, on people's minds. Last question for you. As we've been told 24/7 by every media outlet, except maybe Fox News, Trump is Vladimir Putin's puppet. He does everything Russia wants. So David Swanson, nobody studies these things more than you. Please list all of the things Trump has done at the behest of Russia.
Well, he has, of course, as we say, worked to overthrow the government of Venezuela, put weapons into Ukraine, expanded NATO to Russia's borders, sent missiles into nations on Russia's borders, expanded the war rehearsals in Scandinavia and into Eastern Europe, talked about a Camp Trump base in Poland. Most recent statement of mutual militarism with Poland doesn't mention that, has accused Russia of numerous crimes, opposed Russian energy deals in Europe, has been tearing up agreements, including the INF treaty with Russia, taken the U.S. out of the Iran agreement, has refused Russian proposals on banning weapons in space and cyber attacks, and on and on and on, which I think fairly we can just put down to incompetence. I mean, Trump is the worst president in the history of the United States. He's also the worst servant of a foreign leader ever known to humanity. He just gets everything wrong by accident. He clearly is Vladimir Putin's slave who just gets absolutely everything wrong.
Yeah, and just to be clear, everything you just listed is things that Russia's opposed to. Also, sanctions. He's put more sanctions on Russia than Obama did, correct?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Thank you again so much for being here, and people can get all your work at davidswanson.org, and I hope everyone attends the No to NATO, Yes to Peace Festival here in Washington, D.C., April 3rd and 4th. I will be there. David Swanson will be there. Thank you so much for your wonderful work. You're an example for all of us.
You too. Thanks, Lee.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in and listening to this program. Peace is Possible, and listening to the video that we just saw. It's important that we work for peace and keep the issue of peace before the American people and before Congress. I urge you again to call Congress, call our two senators and call our congressperson to urge that they speak out for a peaceful solution with Iran, a peaceful solution with Venezuela, and to cut this over-bloated military budget, which we don't need. We don't need to be able to blow up the world 100 times. It doesn't make us more secure. The Congressional Switchboard number, again, to reach our two senators and congressperson is 202-224-3121. Thank you again for being part of this program by watching it, and hope you could stand up for peace. Thank you. Bye-bye.